And with that, we welcome you into lcpioneers.com live, presented by PioStream, broadcasting 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live. You can watch us archived at youtube.com/lcpios as we continue to have conversations with student athletes, coaches, alumni, and different members of the Lewis and Clark College community now into the final week of the opening month of the first part of the school year, fall 2020. We appreciate you being with us on this Wednesday. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Goff. I am the play-by-play voice and director of athletic communications for Lewis and Clark. We are the Pioneers out of Portland, Oregon, and a member of the Northwest Conference, competing with other institutions from throughout Northwest Oregon and the state of Washington. An opportunity for our student athletes to compete all over the nation, courtesy of NCAA Division III, over 430 institutions competing at that level in that division. And with Lewis and Clark's robust overseas study programs, certainly opportunities for our student athletes and students alike to go all over the world, chance to have experiential liberal arts education, at least when we're not in the middle of the pandemic. And that is one thing we continue to let you know about with our show. And as we have our guests on too, just asking the question, how are things going with COVID still here with the pandemic? And then specifically in the Pacific Northwest too, wildfires that continue to burn in Oregon, the state of Washington, as well as even down into California too. So we continue to send our best thoughts to those impacted by that and the firefighters working as well to try to get those extinguished. We have Dr. Kayleigh McCauley as our guest today. We will talk to her. She's the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Student Support Services at Lewis and Clark, and a former member of the athletic staff. She's actually a former NCAA student athlete. So lots of things to talk to her about, not only how Lewis and Clark supports students through her office now, but just all of the different things that she's done. She's been heavily involved at Lewis and Clark ever since I've been there, and it's certainly been a great pleasure to get to know her and get an understanding of what she provides our students. So we'll talk to her in just a few moments from now. Of course, if you have any questions for Dr. K or anyone on our show, you can certainly let us know in the Facebook comments below, or you can always email us to sports@lclark.edu. We certainly encourage you getting involved and having a chance to ask those questions. If you go to Twitter and Instagram, we can be found there as well, LC Pioneers on both, and invite you to check out our website, lcpioneers.com. And the reason being is we continue to post content there, but also very excited this morning to make the announcement of our 2020 inductees to the Lewis and Clark Athletics Hall of Fame. A total of 6 individuals are going into the Hall of Fame, as well as the 1993-94 men's basketball program. There's 4 individuals and then 2 others for special awards, Lifetime Achievement and Meritorious Service. So certainly check that out. That was just posted yesterday morning, and excited for our class of 2020. Certainly eager to induct them in an in-person ceremony as soon as we are absolutely able to do so. Again, with the pandemic certainly present, but we'll keep you in that loop at lcpioneers.com and on our Facebook page, because we can't wait to have everyone who's going to be honored to be inducted. That's going to be a fun event as soon as we're able to do so safely. And then, of course, we continue to talk about our YouTube playlist of past lcpioneers.com live shows. Certainly appreciate everyone who said that they have found us on Facebook and on YouTube and a chance to watch those shows. We certainly appreciate all of that, as we've had an opportunity to continue to talk to you all the way back to the last day of March, about 6 months now, continuing. With that said, let's bring in our guest for today. Again, the Associate Dean of Students for Lewis and Clark and a former student athlete in the NCAA level, former member of our department. It's exciting to bring in Dr. K to the show. Hi, Kayleigh McCauley. Appreciate you taking the time to join us on Wednesday and spend some time with us talking about all of the things that you've been able to do at Lewis and Clark and beyond. I kind of want to start with this. I've been asking almost all of my guests, how are things going? The pandemic, and then I mentioned the wildfires are something that has been happening in the state of Oregon. How have things gone for you so far through the fall 2020 semester?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for having me. This is really exciting. My first time on the show, so thank you for the invitation. The last few months have been challenging, exciting, and challenging, and back and forth between the two. In the spring, back in March, in terms of student support services, we really had to shift the way that we were offering support to students. Thankfully, we were very easily able to do that to an online environment. offering, Zoom and phone appointments, and we already had an electronic filing system in place for student records. So, this work from home life, while not ideal, has been okay for me and my team and student support services. Most recently, I think, our students have faced some challenges with dealing with, both COVID and the wildfires here in the Pacific Northwest, impacts on not only the students themselves, but their families. So just finding ways to make sure that we're supporting them throughout this time, and ensuring that they continue to stay engaged in their experiences at Lewis and Clark, especially academically. So we've had to do a lot of creative, out of the box thinking, but we continue to help our students. So,
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning too, Kayleigh. Thank you for all that you do and everyone on your staff and through the whole academic side, because clearly there's been a lot of adjustments to be made. And we may ask you to elaborate on certain things, but I kind of want to start with the basics. Student support services. This is what's been fun about this show, as a chance to introduce those who may not know what your office does, whether they're a parent or an alumnus or somebody who may be considering Lewis and Clark as a student. What is it that student support services offers students at Lewis and Clark?
yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's important to know we are the Department of Student Support Services, and our department is now made up of 2 different offices that work collaboratively to support our students. So we have the Office of Student Support Services, and then the Office of Case Management. And my colleague Amy Milne, who runs the Office of Case Management, she was on a show previously with you, so I'll kind of leave that there. But the Office of Student Support Services, we kind of have a multi-purpose role, if you will. Our primary role is to assist students who have accommodations at the college. So that might be academic accommodations, might be accommodations in the residence halls, addressing accessibility needs for our students. We actually, fun fact, we work with all 3 schools at Lewis and Clark. So we work with undergraduate students, law students, and graduate students. So they keep us quite busy, but that's our primary role, is working with students around accommodations. And then our secondary role is really just supporting students around general academic support, learning skills, study strategies, exam taking strategies, how to talk with your professors, and what questions you should ask during office hours, how to best take notes, kind of helping students develop those skills to make sure that they're successful academically. And then, supporting students as they're managing things that happen in their life that are just circumstances of life, while they're also a student. So, supporting students when there's a death in the family, when they have an injury or an illness that takes them out of the classroom. Those things that just happen to students because they're people, we're supporting students in that way as well. So that's kind of the big picture overview of student support services.
Kayleigh McCauley joining us on lcpioneers.com live, the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Student Support Services at Lewis and Clark. And I went to your website, and we're going to show that off here in just a moment, but it looks like there's some pretty easy to follow. If you're a new student, you click on this button, gives you some information, current students. But I'm curious, what are some of the biggest areas that you've noticed your team having an impact, whether it's new students, current students, maybe even kind of like those frequently asked questions that you get really early on? What are some of the things that you've noticed the most about how student support services has helped?
So the question was, what are the things I've noticed about how student support services has helped students the most?
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think definitely around accommodations. The environment for accommodations in the K-12 system is a little bit different from the accommodations process when you get to college. During K-12, for students that have previously had a 504 or an IEP who accessed accommodations or additional academic support, quite often parents and families are very heavily involved in that process, making sure they're advocating for their children. And oftentimes students aren't directly involved in that support system. They just know that they're getting services and these things are in place, right? So when students transition to college and they're starting to access accommodations, it's a little bit of a transition. You know, you're as a student, you're taking more responsibility for your academic experience. You're having the meetings and the conversations with faculty and staff yourself, without your family members there. You know, you're having to advocate for yourself and speak up and communicate for your own needs. So I think, you know, where myself and my team and student support services really comes into play is helping students in that transition from high school to college, and then while they're at Lewis and Clark, you know, helping them find ways to access their education, but also develop skills that will be transferable in the workplace. So, you know, how can you develop these skills that will be beneficial for you once you graduate Lewis and Clark as well? So that's what I would say is the biggest thing we help with.
Well, that's a great answer, and certainly helpful to understand some of those things in motion for sure. I mentioned at the top that you have been part of the athletics department. So let's go back to the journey to Lewis and Clark. What was it that originally brought you to Lewis and Clark, and how has this college impacted you? How has the city of Portland been beneficial for you?
Yeah, gosh. Okay, journey to Lewis and Clark. I think this is my 6th year at LC, and my going into my 4th year in my role as Associate Dean of Students. What brought me to Lewis and Clark originally? I was working down in Texas at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. Prior to my current role, I'd worked in college athletics for about 12 years or so. At A&M Corpus Christi, I worked with Division I student athletes around academic support and student athlete development. I was there for 6 years, and while I was there, I was in school. I was pursuing my doctoral degree in educational leadership, higher education. So once I finished my degree program, it was kind of time to move on professionally, and really wanted to get back to my Division III roots. I was a Division III student athlete myself. So I saw the job opening at Lewis and Clark. I applied, and Mark Petrock, who's our athletics director currently, he was actually the interim AD at the time, and he hired me on as academic coordinator. And so that's what brought me to Lewis and Clark. And over time, I think, you know, I worked hard and folks recognized my skill set. And so my position in the athletics department kind of evolved over time. And part of my job when I was in the athletics department involved collaborating with other campus partners, and definitely on the academic side, but also within student life. And so I had the opportunity to step into the Director of Student Support Services role on an interim basis, and kind of took that leap of faith, if you will. And yeah, it's now a few years later. So
Yeah, no, and that's what I love about having you on the show is you have been involved with probably every single person on this campus at one point or another. And you mentioned now with student support services, even working with all 3 campuses at Lewis and Clark. We're talking to Kayleigh McCauley, the Associate Dean of Students, on lcpioneers.com live. You can watch us 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live. And I'm curious too, when you were working in athletics and had that opportunity kind of early on in your stint at Lewis and Clark, what were some of your most memorable moments about getting to work with student athletes? What makes the Department of Athletics at Lewis and Clark something special?
Oh, wow. Um, yeah, I think some of my most memorable moments are, gosh, just connecting with individual students from all over the place. I mean, yeah, I mean, our students are from all over and just have all different backgrounds and life experiences, and um, being able to connect with them, especially when I was doing a lot of academic support. It was like individual one-on-one meetings at that time. So you really start to develop relationships with students over time and get to know them, get to know what motivates them, um, get to know what their family life was like and what their academic background was like. So I really kind of miss that. I don't work with too many students one-on-one anymore. Just a handful. A lot of what I do now is administrative and kind of big picture work. Not so much one-on-one work with students, which is kind of sad in a way. But I guess that's what happens as you move through your career. Um, yeah, so I think some of those one-on-one moments, seeing students graduate and meeting their families for the first time at graduation after you've worked with a student for 4 years. Those are some memorable moments, for sure.
I mean, I think your answers were amazing. I thought it was that you missed most being my office neighbor, but if that's what you remember most, I can completely understand.
Yeah, you were a great office neighbor, actually.
All I try to do is make sure no one's office ever looks messy, because mine is by far always going to be the messiest. You mentioned your time as an NCAA student athlete, and you competed in softball, field hockey at the University of New England. When you reflect back on your own experience as an NCAA student athlete, what comes to mind as ways that it shaped you and helped you and really, kind of set you forward for your career?
Yeah. So I played 4 years of field hockey and 2 years of softball, at the University of New England. It's in southern Maine. Um, Small D3 school, pretty similar at the time in scope to Lewis and Clark. So I think even just that experience alone kind of helped my path to Lewis and Clark. I think that's the similarities were something that drew me to LC. Um, you know, the whole reason I got started working in athletics, working in higher education, was because I had an injury, a knee injury, in January of my sophomore year playing softball, and because of that, I wasn't able to continue playing. But I was able to secure an internship working directly with our athletics director at the time, and so that alone has really shaped my career. Looking back on it, with the different steps I took along my professional journey, it really started with making the most out of an injury, which I think that puts some things into perspective, for a lot of student athletes that suffer injuries during their playing time. You got to find the good with the bad, and take the positive from the situation, even though you might not see it as a positive thing in the moment. But looking back on it, it really is. And then I just think, my interactions and my relationships with my coaches and faculty and staff, some of those relationships are lifelong relationships where I still keep in touch with those folks. They're still advisors and mentors to me even today. And those relationships really drove me to do the work that I do now, because they made such a positive impact on my life as a student. I want to give back to other students in that way, and be supportive in kind of a similar fashion that they were, but in my own way. So, yeah.
I mean, that's really great. And, you mentioned field hockey, and I had to ask you before the show, where are the closest NCAA field hockey programs, and we kind of centralized around Cal and Stanford. So in 30 seconds, give me the way that you describe field hockey to a place like the Pacific Northwest that's less versed in the sport.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it, and some people in the field hockey world might disagree with me, but in the Pacific Northwest, it's easiest to compare it to lacrosse, but on the ground. So take the stick and the ball and put it on the ground instead of it up in the air, and it's pretty similar to that. Maybe with a mix of soccer in terms of like the player formations on the field. But yeah, very heavily in the U.S. anyway, very heavily concentrated in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states for sure.
Well, if nothing else, maybe we have the front runner for the head coach of the program if field hockey ever comes to the Pacific Northwest in Lewis and Clark. Dr. K, you're absolutely beloved on this campus. Thank you for everything that you do, and we miss you in athletics, not being on our staff, but certainly thankful you're on our campus. Really appreciate taking time to join us on the show today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely welcome. Dr. Kayleigh McCauley on lcpioneers.com live. Yeah, absolute blast to talk to, and she has... I don't know. If you look at the last half decade or so, there may not be another person on our campus outside of like the president's office who's had as much impact and involvement with every single part of the college. I mean, not only through her career movement. I mean, she's held lots of different positions now in terms of, offices involved with and whatnot. As she mentioned, though, 4 years as the associate dean of students, but just the amount of student athletes and students that she's had a chance to impact, whether directly or indirectly. That was a lot of fun, really, to get her perspective on things and to hear how things have been going through the early part of the fall semester. So a lot of fun to talk to her, and excited for what's to come with the rest of the year. I mean, you could tell that it hasn't been the easiest start to the year, but certainly everyone who's been working together and trying to persevere to get everything going for the upcoming semester and all the hard work that's paid off. I'm certainly thankful to everybody who's been able to do that. And then, she talked about, kind of the overview of student support services, but in our Facebook Live chat, we did include a link to the website for student support services. So be sure to check that out. If you have any other questions, and before we sign off, I may do it after I kick it to our commercials toward the end of the show, I will put a link on how to make an appointment too, because that is key. We also linked in our interview with the Office of Case Management, Amy Milne and others, kind of giving an overview. Robin joined us. That was the other person that we had on the show for that interview. I think that was before the summer break or at the very tail end of the spring semester, somewhere around there. So you should check that out. It's on our playlist of all of our past shows at youtube.com/lcpios. So certainly a lot of fun to talk to Kayleigh. We have a couple of other live shows for the rest of the week. We'll talk to Michael Abraham coming up tomorrow. He is a senior for Lewis and Clark football, a former unanimous All Northwest Conference first team selection at running back, and has really been the dominant force rushing the football for the Pioneers and one of the most dominant running backs in the Northwest Conference the last couple of years. He's also from Portland, so I have a chance to talk to Michael about his Lewis and Clark experience so far. And then Olivia Weaver joins us from women's golf on Friday, rising junior and now a junior. We're already into the fall semester. So a chance to talk to Olivia about golf, impact on her life as well, see what she's excited about for the upperclassmen years at Lewis and Clark as she joins the Pios from Illinois. So a chance to talk to also someone coming from the Midwest and get a perspective on things about Portland, things about Lewis and Clark that she's really enjoyed too in her first 2 years as a student. So until we talk to you again tomorrow, big thanks again to Dr. K for joining us, Kayleigh McCauley, and big thanks to you for watching as well. We look forward to having you again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, as we do every single Tuesday through Friday at lcpioneers.com/live and archived at youtube.com/lcpios. I'm Ryan Goff. Thanks for having fun with us. We'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye, everybody.
Hi, I'm Nick Lombardi. Something I've learned at Winterim this year is how to communicate a vision.
My biggest takeaway from Winterim is probably the networking. Getting to talk to everybody, connect with people for the future is one of the most valuable things, and I did Winterim last year, came back for more this year.
I think a way in which my liberal arts education has really helped me and my group formulate our ideas is that concept of critical thinking and having many different backgrounds, me being an econ major and my two group mates being chemistry majors. we really get that well-rounded background, well-rounded ideas.
I think overall it's absolutely worth doing. You find yourself not only being more prepared for, say, well, this next semester, on top of being more prepared for life in general.
I think everyone should take intro to chemistry because the chemistry department here is phenomenal. Everyone I've known has had a good experience with everyone in that department, so I think it's a worthwhile course to take.
What is one class that everyone should take at Lewis and Clark? I really enjoyed Education in a Complex World. You kind of get to discuss all the issues that exist within education today, and you get to kind of explore that by going to classrooms firsthand and volunteering with children, which I thought was a really wonderful experience.
One class that everybody should take at Lewis and Clark is anything with Kundai though. I think he definitely changed how I thought about rhetoric and media studies and just education in general.
For me, it was international affairs, just intro to international affairs, because I think it really gives a good perspective on important issues around the world.